We had done most of the Dickinson poems last week, especially the... did we look at the riddle poems? That gives you a side to Emily that that isn't normally touched on. Riddles, again, was a game that they played, sort of like charades. The person would give a couple hints. What's got a foot but can't walk? Couldn't guess it on that. Then they'd say, well, it's not a king, but it should have a crown. Couldn't guess it on that. They would give you another clue. The answer is a rule. The riddle poems are the same way. The topic of the poem is never mentioned. You're supposed to figure out what it is. If you look at poem, let's see where they start. 585. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up and stop to feed itself at tanks. Anybody know what that one was all about? Steam engine. The key is to stop to feed itself at tanks. It goes around the mountains. It crawls between the narrow railroad cuttings. That was number 585.
No,
What was it? It was the steam locomotive. Surprising how many 19th century poets wrote poems to steam engines for some reason. Whitman has one. It was one of the worst poems that Whitman wrote. How about 986, a narrow fellow in the grass? It's a snake. A snake. So he's narrow and tends to be... How about 311? It sifts from leaden sieves and powders all the woods. The snow. The snow. 15, what inn is this? All the rooms are below ground. There's no fires in them. The landlord is a necromancer. He talks to the dead.
Hell.
Hell's not... That's an interesting one. That would fit. It's more like it's a cemetery because the rooms are the open graves. 1501 tells you the answer to itself. It's about a dandelion. 1463, a root of evanescence. That's one of the toughest ones. The hummingbird. Evanescence is something that's evaporating as you look at it, and all you see of the hummingbird is the blur. Its wings move so fast they look like they're rotating around its body. That's why it has a revolving wheel. A resonance of emerald, a rush of cochineal. Emerald is, the hummingbird is green, and around the throat it's purple, which is what, reddish purple. I forget what the name for that color is. Guys only see red, yellow, blue, black, and white anyway.
Reddish purple, that's what it is.
It's purple. It's sort of, whatever it is. Anyway, it's sort of purple. Every blossom on the bush adjusts its tumbled head. The hummingbird puts its beak into the flower. Some Freudian significance to that. Tumbled was a slang term for having sex. So its head is bobbing up and down. You wouldn't expect that reference from Emily Dickinson, but when we look at some of these other poems, it makes a little bit more sense. The mail from Tunis, probably an early morning's ride, because it's so fast you can bring the mail from North Africa. 675 is another fairly tough one, and maybe the first hint of the affair that Emily may or may not have. Most biographers like to think that she had one. Again, the candidates are many and varied. Although I think probably if there was a lover, it was probably the Reverend Charles Wadsworth. Essential oils are wrung. The attar from the rose. Be not expressed by sons alone. It is the gift of screws. They made their own perfume. Rose water. They took the rose petals and they had a little hand press that screwed down and squeezed the attar out of the rose. Then they took the dried flowers and made a little... What's that little pillow made of dried flowers that you put in a drawer?
Sachet.
Sachet. They made a sachet out of it, and that's what the second stanza is about. The general rose decay, but this, in lady's drawer, makes summer, when lady lie in ceaseless rosemary. Remember that language of flowers, rosemary is for remembrance. So what is it that Emily lays on the ground and thinks about summer from? Well, some critics thought it was from the affair with the Reverend Wadsworth. 640 is a poem that seems to be to a married man. I cannot live with you. Now, she saw Wadsworth preach in Philadelphia one of the few times she was out of Amherst. She met with him at least 6 times at her house. The house had a garden behind it and an orchard, so there may have been other meetings as well. If it is Wadsworth, why can't she live with him? Because he's married. I cannot live with you. It would be life. And life is over there, behind the shelf the sexton keeps the key to. The shelf, the sexton was the chief, yes?
She had an affair with him, you said? Or
Well, there's a lot of biographers that think that her withdrawal from the world came because of a disappointed love affair. I mean, there's another version that said Emily was neurotic. She would get a crush on a guy, think that he knew about it, then he wouldn't respond to her, and she would feel like she was jilted. I don't think Emily was that neurotic. I think there probably may have been a love affair. Although the latest thinking is, again, I don't know if I mentioned that or not, that the lover might have been her sister-in-law Sue, who was pretty worldly. And didn't I tell you about Professor Callender doing that? Yeah, I did mention that. He was here tonight too. I should have made him come in and tell you about those poems. The sexton's the chief lay official of the church. He keeps the key to the cemetery. What happens to true lovers who don't get together in this world? They meet afterwards in the afterlife. So life is over there in the cemetery, the shelf that the sexton keeps the key to, putting up our life, his porcelain, like a cup, discarded of the housewife, quaint or broke. A newer Sèvres pleases. That isn't a misspelling. Sèvres was a kind of china. Old ones crack. So the sexton buries us, puts us up, like we were pieces of old china. They're a little bit odd, and there's maybe a little flaw in the pattern. But you don't throw those away. You put them up until you need them again. Like they're going to be put up until the second coming, when they rise from the dead and get back together. I could not die with you. That might be one of those metaphysical puns. Emily had read the metaphysical poets. She had talked about them with Sue. Sue was pretty worldly. She might have told her what die was a pun for. It could also mean that she couldn't literally die with him. For one must wait to shut the other's gaze down. You could not. Remember, when somebody died, that was a big thing, to hear their last words, or be the one who closed their eyes after death. Why couldn't she have been the one to close his eyes if he died? Yeah, that would have been his wife. She wouldn't even have been allowed in the house. He actually could have closed her eyes, though, after she died. Why? She's not married, and he's the minister. So he could have been there. And could I stand by and see you freeze without my right of frost, death's privilege? Nor could I rise with you. She couldn't get up with him in the morning because they can't live together. Or she couldn't rise to heaven with him because your face would put out Jesus's, that new grace, grown plain and foreign to my homesick eye, except that you, then he, shone closer by. If I went to heaven and they made me stand next to Jesus instead of you, I'd look disappointed. They judge us. You notice it's not he would judge us, not God would judge us. They'd judge us. People would judge us. How? Boy, would they. For you served heaven, you know, or sought to. How does he serve heaven? He's a minister. But that's why she adds or sought to. If there's an affair going on with Emily, he's certainly not serving God in that. I could not. There's a little feminist jab there, I think. Why couldn't she serve heaven the same way he does? She's a woman. She can't be a minister. Because you saturated sight, he's all that she can see. I had no more eyes for sordid excellence as paradise. Sordid excellence is an unusual phrase because you would normally talk about a sordid affair, a tawdry or shabby affair. But heaven, compared to their affair, is what's shabby and tawdry. And were you lost if he were damned? I would be, though my name rang loudest on the heavenly fame. And were you saved, and I condemned to be where you were not? At self were hell to me. So we must meet apart. That might mean we meet even though we're apart by writing letters, or it may mean apart from everybody where nobody can see us. You there, I here, with just the door ajar. When he came to visit her, everybody visited Emily up in her room. Not that they thought anything was going on between Emily and the judge, or Emily and Samuel Bowles, the editor, or even Emily and the minister, but the doors would have been left a little bit open, at least anyway, for propriety's sake. The idea that nothing is going on here. So that's what the door ajar is a reference to. That oceans are, and prayer, and that white sustenance, despair. Now the white sustenance is the communion bread, so for her, getting together is the equivalent of communion. But it's despair now because Wadsworth left abruptly for California to become pastor of the Church of Calvary. And it's from that time that Emily's complete withdrawal from the world starts. And for the next year and a half, she writes something like 1,700 poems. Which is one way, to, if you're at all suicidal, to keep from committing suicide, is to throw yourself totally into your work. So that's sometimes seen as what puts Emily over the edge, is Wadsworth suddenly going off. If you look at poem 1072, that one seems even more directly aimed at somebody like Wadsworth at the very least. Title divine is mine. His wife only has the earthly title to him. But they're true lovers, so they're going to be together in the afterlife, so she has the divine title. The wife, without the sign. So she hasn't got either the sign of the cross that's made over them in the ceremony, or she hasn't got any of the signs. She hasn't got the ring, etc. Acute degree conferred on me. His wife has the bachelor's degree, maybe, but she has the PhD, the acute, the extreme degree. Empress of Calvary. Remember, he's going to go to the Church of Calvary. Of course, that line, what else is Calvary? It's where the crucifixion takes place. So she could be Empress of Calvary in the sense of Empress of Sorrow. But if he's the minister of Calvary, he'd be the emperor, she would be the empress. Royal, all but the crown. So they're married in every sense of the word except having had a ceremony. Betrothed, engaged. Without that swoon, God sends us women when you hold garnet to garnet, gold to gold. When did women swoon? When did they faint? When they heard anything to do with sex. If you were unmarried, if you were married, you just had a blush. And of course, during sex. Women swooned, they passed out. That way they weren't responsible for any of the noises or screaming that went on afterwards. I don't know, I passed out, I wasn't there. So that sounds like them having gotten together. Born, bridled, shrouded in a day. Several ways to interpret that. Maybe no actual affair ever took place. It may have been that he came to see her, so she's born, she comes alive. Bridled because he says, I know you're my true love. Shrouded, what's shrouded mean anyway? A shroud is a winding sheet, what they would wrap the body up in, so killed. What kills her is he says, I know you're my true love, but I'm a married man, I'm a minister, you're too much of a temptation, I'm leaving tomorrow for California. That's big, and maybe a big enough disappointment to put you into the kind of depression that makes you withdraw from the world. On the other hand, born, he comes to see her, she's born, he makes her alive. Bridled, they make love. Shrouded, because he says, well, your letters are pretty cryptic, my wife's no fool, she knows what's going on. She also knows even if I promise to stop seeing you, I won't, so she's made me accept a job in California. Or, he comes to see her, born, she comes alive. Bridled, they make love. Shrouded, because he tells her he's going off to California. Or maybe this is not the first time, but simply the last time that he comes. She comes alive, they make love, then he says, oh yeah, by the way, I'm leaving for California tomorrow. That kind of betrayal. Women break off an affair, there's a sign in the door, in the window of their house, don't even come in. How do guys usually do it? You must have somebody who got dumped sooner somewhere. How do guys are going to break up with you? Do they send you a note and say it's all over? No, they come and make love one more time and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going back to my wife. Now, if you're the Virgin Queen of Amherst, if you've saved the only thing the 19th century thought a woman had of any value, and you've given that up to a guy who then betrays you and runs off to California, that might be the kind of betrayal that would cause you to withdraw from the world. My husband, women say, stroking the melody. Is this the way? Is this what it's all about? If you look at poem 1670, before we look at that, earthworms, what color are they?
Brown.
Brown, maybe gray. Cold or warm-blooded? Cold-blooded. In winter in my room, I came upon a worm, pink, lank, limp, and warm. Are we talking earthworms here? But as he was a worm, now a worm was also a name for a seducer. Somebody who seduced and abandoned women would have been called a worm. But as he was a worm, and worms presume they overstep their bounds, not quite at home with him at home, secured him by a string to something neighboring, and went along. The string, the ligature, was a popular method of birth control in the 19th century. It was a little piece of string made into a noose, slipped over the male, and pulled tight.
What?
I don't make this stuff up. There wasn't a lot in the way. There's not a lot in the way of birth control. And as long as you pull that noose tight enough, you don't have to worry about
What
conception.
do you mean by secured him by a string?
Tied it to him. She tied him with a string. She secured him.
Is she always talking about the same guy all the time?
I think so. I mean, nobody knows for sure. Nobody even knows for sure if there was a guy.
I'm just trying this stuff.
But if
Got a
the-
lot of dudes coming.
This does seem like a much greater knowledge of male anatomy than you expect from the Virgin Queen of Amherst.
She's tested things, I think.
A trifle afterwards a thing occurred. I'd not believe it if I heard, but state with creeping blood a snake with models rare surveyed my chamber floor in feature as the worm before. So now the worm's turned into a snake. It looks the same, but ringed with power, this very string with which I tied him to. When he was mean, small, and new, that string was there. I shrank. How fair you are. But we don't know whether she's saying that to the snake or the snake is saying that to her. Propitiation's claw. Propitiation means to satisfy. Afraid, he hissed, of me? No, cordiality. To be cordial is to be friendly. Are you afraid of me? No, I'm afraid of being too friendly with you. He fathomed me. Fathom can mean to understand or to measure the depth of. To a rhythm slim. What would a slim rhythm be? One that's fast or gets faster. Secreted in his, or secreted in his form as patterns swim, projected him. Little sperm or little genetic patterns of people. Apparently the string wasn't tight enough. That time I flew both eyes his way, lest he pursue, nor ever cease to run, till in a distant town, towns on from mine, I set me down. This was a dream. Notice how that last line is almost tacked on afterwards? Well, if it was a dream, it was one Sigmund Freud would have loved to have gotten his hands on. And again, it certainly betrays a knowledge of male anatomy far beyond what we'd expect from somebody who never came out of their garret or out of their house. Anybody have any questions or comments on Emily Dickinson's French?
Would that be considered a riddle? I mean, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, a kind of riddle poem.
She's talking in rhymes. She's not really saying.
She's given little hints about what went on, Yeah, nobody's ever seen that before. It's a kind of, both a riddle poem and if you guess the secret. Now, when Emily died, she said to her sister, burn the poems. But you remember how the 19th century always talked so you would fill in what was left out? She didn't mean burn all the poems. She meant burn the poems like this that people will be able to deduce the affair from. And, of course, there was an argument within the family about what they ought to do. There were several arguments about producing the poems. Higginson got involved, her sister-in-law, and the poems don't get burned. So we end up with this poem, which is probably making Emily spin in her grave now. All right, we're going to move on into Poe as soon as I change.